you're going to need a big mixing bowl, and we're going to begin with 2 cups of flour. So 2 cups of flour is what you begin with. I'm going to make half of the recipe because there's only 2 people in my house. So I'm going to do half, but I'll tell you the amounts to make the full recipe. But we're going to begin with 1 cup of flour. And once you've done the 2 cups of flour, keep the flour near you because we're gonna probably need a little bit more of it. So don't put it away. So if you're writing down the recipe, it's 2 cups of flour. Okay, great. The next thing is the baking powder. So you're going to add 2.5 teaspoons of baking powder. I'm going to do less. I'm going to make some pretty sizable scones. So 2.5, make sure it's nice and level.
Okay.
So 2 cups of flour, 2.5 teaspoons of baking powder, and then we'll add in some of the spices. Okay, so now we're gonna do just a little pinch of salt. So I'm not even gonna measure it. I'm just gonna do literally a pinch. So just a little pinch of salt.
Now, Katie, as a cook, is there a certain type of brand of salt that you really think is better? No? Are you partial to one?
No. Okay, let's do the spices. So you have the cinnamon and nutmeg. So do a full teaspoon of cinnamon, but I would only do 1/4 teaspoon of nutmeg because it can be a bit overpowering if you do too much of it.
Okay.
So do a full teaspoon of the cinnamon, but then I would just do 1/4 teaspoon of nutmeg just so that it doesn't taste just like nutmeg.
Oh, come on.
And then I think if you were going to make your own pumpkin spice at home, it's nutmeg, cloves, cinnamon, what's the other one? Allspice maybe? You can definitely make your own pumpkin spice at home if you don't have any. And you can also make scones savory as well. When I was growing up, I had cheese scones a lot, so you can make them savory too. And then once you've added those spices in, you can just give that a mix. You can just use a spoon and you can just mix all of those dry ingredients together. Set the oven to 400. So then we're gonna use the butter. So you're going to use a whole stick. And what we're actually gonna do is shred the butter. So if you have a cheese grater, it doesn't have to be a tower one like this. It can be a handheld one. Just see if you can see if you find a cheese grater somewhere. We're gonna shred it. If you don't, you can just slice it up into little pieces and use your fingers. Okay, so grab a stick of butter and grab a cutting board and a knife and cut it up into really small cubes. And I'll show you what. I'll get mine up too. But for anyone that makes it that does have a cheese grater, you'll shred it and then add it in to the flour.
I've done this technique when making biscuits.
Yeah, it's kind of, they're almost the same as biscuits.
Good to know.
Very close. Same kind of texture to it. So I'll shred mine. So I'm just going to shred mine. And what we'll do once we've incorporated the butter into the flour, whichever way we've done it, we're going to stick the whole bowl in the freezer so that it can chill. So I have...
To move your camera down so we can see what you're doing.
Yes, I was just going to show when I have an ungreasy hand, so hold on.
Sorry. And now is the butter just from the fridge or from the freezer?
From the fridge, and then like I said, we're gonna put it in our bowl and then stick that whole thing in the freezer so it chills while we do something else. So I just have it in a pile like this, and then I'll add it in here. Okay, yeah, so put it in your flour, and then I'll pretend that I have mine cubed up. You're gonna use your fingertips and kind of squeeze the butter into the flour so that then you break up those pieces so that they get smaller. So by using the cheese grater, we've just skipped that step because now it's in small pieces already. So I'll just kind of rub it in to the flour a little bit and break up any big pieces. But so when you rub it in, you're just using your fingertips because you want to try and keep it cold. And if you used your whole hands, your hands are warm. Go in with your hands and use your fingertips and really squeeze those chunks of butter so that it resembles kind of like coarse breadcrumbs almost. So you do have to give it a bit of a squeeze, but they will eventually get smaller. And so now I've rubbed in my shredded stuff. I'm gonna put this whole bowl in the freezer just to let it chill while we do the next step. So that, yes, it does take a little bit, especially because it's a whole stick. It can take a little bit. So just keep going. You want to get the pieces kind of broken up so they're smaller. But remember,
I have a microplane at home. Would that work as well, or would you prefer like I'm
sure it would, but it will probably melt by the time you finish shredding it because it would take a while. You could try it.
I'm just trying to think. I can't think of where my cheese grater is right now. I'm still unpacking.
I know, we have like the luxury of just being able to buy pre-shredded cheese. So once that's in the freezer, we will get the wet ingredients prepped. And we have to do something to the pumpkin before we can add it because pumpkin's quite wet. So we need to kind of dry it a little bit. I'm using a can as well, but we need to kind of pat it dry. So we'll do that in a minute. So the next ingredients that we're going to do is the pumpkin, the cream or the milk if you don't have cream. We're not actually going to add too much because the pumpkin's going to add quite a bit of moisture and the egg. So the liquid is going to be like the last resort of making it come together. Okay, great. So what I am going to do, I have a cereal bowl and some paper towels. So we're going to measure out half a cup of the pumpkin and put it into this. And then we're going to kind of squeeze it so that we get out as much of the moisture as we can. So I'm just using a bowl like this, and then you're going to measure out half a cup. I'm going to do half of that. And then put it on some paper towels so that then you can squeeze out as much of the moisture as you can because pumpkin is obviously pretty wet. And I've made the mistake of making scones too wet and they're just not very nice. So we want to get out as much moisture as we can. Here. So I've just got mine in a cereal bowl or just a small bowl with some paper towels underneath the pumpkin. You can already see how much liquid is coming out of it just by, it's only been sitting on it for like less than a minute and there's already a bunch coming out. What kind of pumpkin did I use? It was very, very difficult to get pumpkin. I had to send my mother for pumpkin. So it's just a regular can. It's not the stuff mixed with squash or anything like that. It's just 100% pure pumpkin puree. But I don't know if anybody else has been having a hard time buying pumpkin recently. I'm gonna put some more on top of it as well. So I'm really trying to push down and squeeze out as much liquid as I can. And then we're gonna have to pick it up out of the paper towels and kind of scrape it into the bowl. So I've pushed down quite a bit. So I'm gonna then just scrape what I can. We still have to add the liquid, the moisture from a whole egg, which is going to make the moisture, the kind of mix wet as well. So I ended up with this and quite a bit of liquid on the paper towels, which is good. I've made fruit scones quite a few times, and when you use a fruit that's really wet, like strawberries, they make the dough really tacky and sticky, and then the texture of the scone is more like thick and cakey rather than crumbly. So I always try and figure out how I can add in less moisture by using a fruit like blueberries, where they don't kind of leak as much. That's why we want to try and get as much moisture out of this pumpkin as we can, because otherwise it'll just make a really thick, kind of chewy texture, and we don't want that. Now we can crack our egg into that pumpkin. And then we need the brown sugar. And so you're going to add in ½ a cup of the brown sugar. So I have mine in this bowl. I'm gonna do half of that because I'm having the recipe. So when you measure out brown sugar, you really have to push it down into the measuring cup. So then so you should have the egg, the pumpkin, and the brown sugar in a bowl. Then I'm just gonna take a fork and just kind of mix everything together. So adding the egg is gonna loosen up the pumpkin a bit. And then just give it a mix so it's kind of smoothed out now. If you wanted to add a teaspoon of vanilla extract to this, that would taste really good. I thought I had some, but I can't find it. If you wanted to add a teaspoon of vanilla to this pumpkin, then go ahead. Yeah, so you can have in the same bowl the pumpkin, the egg, the brown sugar, and optional vanilla. And if you do have milk or cream, you could add a little bit into this mixture, but not much. A couple of tablespoons. Yeah, but just a couple of tablespoons to begin with, because like I said, if you add too much moisture to a scone, it makes it very cakey. So we'll just start slow with the liquid. So let's get our bowl out of the freezer so then we can combine the two.
Now, Katie, if I was going to take this recipe and change it to like cheddar and chive, what would be the difference? Would I like not add, obviously not add the pumpkin?
You'd have to add milk, more liquid. So usually like ½ a cup of milk-ish plus the egg, and then some shredded cheese and the spices, and obviously without the sugar in it. Because we're adding the pumpkin, that's where the main source of liquid is coming from. But if you're doing something savory, or like the fruit ones, like blueberry that don't have much liquid, you do have to add milk or cream. I haven't done it with cream. I usually do it with milk. So start by adding half of that pumpkin mixture, because we're gonna go slow. Because if we add all of it in at once and it ends up too sticky, then it's kind of ruined. So scoop in about half of it. I'll show you, I'm gonna do the same thing. So I'm gonna scoop in about half, because the end result, or like texture that we're going for, is very thick and sticky. So I'm gonna just add some of it. And then I'm just gonna go in with a spatula and mix it up. And then if it hasn't come together as a nice dough, then I'll add in a bit more of my pumpkin. But I really want to keep it, I want to get it to the point where it just comes together as a dough, so it's not sticky. So just add in half of the pumpkin, give it a good mix, and then if we need anything extra, then we'll add it. So I'm gonna add another little scoopful. So I'm going nice and slow. I think that might be good. Make sure you're really picking it up from underneath as well, because that's where the flour kind of hides out. And we want it to be really thick. So I think I'm really pushing down with my spatula to get the sticky stuff mixed in with the dry stuff. But it's come together pretty much as like one big sticky mass of dough. But I still have a little bit of pumpkin left that I haven't added, and I'm not going to add it. Yeah, so if it hasn't come together, so if you take a look, this is what mine looks like. I can squeeze it together and it makes a nice lump. Start with half. I added another couple of tablespoons to it, and then I've managed to make it come together. I'm touching it and it's leaving a little bit of like sticky stuff on me, but it's not leaving too much on me, which is what we want. So I'm happy with that. And we haven't added any or extra liquid. We used the spatula and really like pushed down and squeezed the sticky stuff into the dry stuff. So you really want to try and add the least amount of liquid as possible. So it's come together as a nice round ball. And then the white chunks are just the pieces of shredded butter, which is fine because they'll melt in the oven and they'll make, so that it comes together as a lump. It's a little sticky, but it's not wet sticky. So I'm just going to wash my hands. What was that question? I have not added chocolate chips to this. I add chocolate chips to the fruit ones. And you would just add those now with everything else. But chocolate chips would actually be a really good addition. That's a good idea. But yes, if you wanted to add chocolate chips, I wouldn't add too many because it could prevent it from coming together. So I would do like half a cup of chocolate chips or less with this recipe if you were to add them, because we don't want it to prevent the dough from coming together. Yeah, that is actually a really good suggestion. One thing I will ask you to do now is get a baking sheet. And if you have parchment paper, use that. If you don't have parchment paper, you could probably use foil. You just need to spray the foil so that they don't stick. And then what we'll need is, I do it on the same cutting board that I use to shred my butter, but we're gonna shape the dough on this. So if you grab a cutting board or just something big and then sprinkle some flour on it. So sprinkle some flour around a cutting board and then put your dough on top of that. And so once you have flour down and then your dough, just roll the dough around in the flour just so that it kind of takes the stickiness away so that we can touch it. So I'm just rolling the dough in the flour so it looks like a snowball, kind of. Just to take the stickiness away. Okay, so then we're gonna flatten it just a bit. We don't want it to be thin. We want it to be quite thick, but I'm just kind of pat it down so it's a thick, wide disc. So I'm trying to keep it a circle. And we want it to be quite thick. So I'm keeping it this thick. So we don't want it to be thin. That's not what we're going for. We want it to be nice and thick and like a round disc. So it's nice and chunky. And then we'll grab a knife. You're gonna slice into 8 pieces. Actually, I could probably do 8 small ones. You'll have 8 big ones, and I could probably do 8 small ones. So we'll cut it in half down the middle. And so if you ever have scones and you've added too much liquid to them, when you go to slice them, it's like sticky and like sticks to you. But these, I've been able to cut it in half and it holds its shape. Okay, so I have 8 little ones, but you should have 8 quite big ones. So you can see they're holding their shape really well. Sometimes I've made them experimenting with recipes and they've been so sticky that they're like droopy and they don't hold their shape, but these are nice that they're just holding really well. And then I'll move them onto my baking tray. I'm going to give them a little bit of room in between each one because they will expand a bit. Some people like to put them like in a circle like we sliced them. So if you like doing it that way, then you definitely can. But I'm just laying them out randomly like that. Okay, and then at this point, if you did have extra milk or extra cream, then you could brush a little bit with a pastry brush on top. You could also do it with an egg if you wanted to, but you definitely don't have to do that. I'm just gonna do it because I have a little bit of cream. So I'm just gonna give it a little brush. I'm gonna try and kind of shake off the excess because I don't want it dripping all over the place. I also have a different type of brown sugar. It's demerara sugar, so it's like a really coarse brown sugar. So I'm gonna sprinkle just a little bit of that on each one as well. You could also do it with just a little bit of extra brown sugar as well, but it will just give them a nice little crunch, like a sugary crunch on top. Let's put them in the oven. Set a timer for 20 minutes.
Okay.
And they should be a nice golden brown after that, but if they're not, then you can stick them in for an extra 5. I'm gonna do 15 because mine are smaller. So I'm just gonna use a little bowl like this to make the glaze because we're not gonna make very much. So just grab a really small one or a cereal bowl, something small. And then measure out half a cup of powdered sugar into that bowl. And everybody, if you make this again, you could do it with maple syrup or you could just use it with milk. Either one would be fine. And then we had a question, what's the best piece of nutritional advice that you can give? I would say don't listen to anything that you hear on TV or from somebody that isn't a dietitian. And then if you ever hear somebody that says that you can't eat bread or pasta or any carbs like that, ignore all of that. You can eat any food group that you like. So just don't listen to anybody that tells you to cut something out or not eat something, or you have to eat certain things together. All of that stuff is just fad stuff. So I think most dietitians that you meet will tell you that you can eat from every food group every day and you don't have to follow any specific hard fast rule of calories or diets or anything like that. So just look at where your information is coming from, I think would be my best suggestion. So maple syrup, we're gonna start with 2 tablespoons and then we'll mix it and we'll see what the consistency is like. So start with 2 tablespoons and grab a fork or a whisk. And so we want it to be relatively thick because if it's too runny, then it just won't stick to the scones when they're done. So I'm gonna start with that. Okay, mine's a little thick. I'm gonna add a little bit of this cream that I have. If yours is a little thick, add a little bit of extra maple syrup. It's come together as like an icing now. It's probably just a little bit too thick because it's not like dripping off my fork. So I'm gonna add just a little bit. So go spoonful by spoonful, Deborah, of adding some extra syrup because we don't want to make it then too runny.
True.
Okay, this looks better. So it's like this. So it's still a pretty thick, yeah, so just let this sit. And then when they come out of the oven, you'll have to wait until they're completely cool to glaze them. Because if you put the glaze on when they're warm, then it'll just melt. When the timer goes off, they should be a nice golden brown. You can pick them up and see what color they are underneath too. And if you think they need to be a little extra brown, then put them in for an extra couple of minutes. And then just let them cool completely before you drizzle the glaze on them. Otherwise the glaze will just melt. So, and the point of us making it thick is that when we drizzle it, it sticks. So we just want to make sure that happens.
With the holidays coming up, do you have any advice on, I know it's just typical of winter and the holidays and putting on some extra pounds. Do you have any advice?
I mean, I think we're in such a ridiculous time right now that this might be one of the kind of highlights of the year of being with family, and you don't want to look back on those times thinking that you kind of didn't let yourself have that slice of cake, or you didn't let yourself have that, I don't know, bowl of ice cream. So I would say have the treats that you like, because the more you tell yourself that you can't have something, the more you then desire it. So if you allow yourself to have those things as part of like a normal diet rather than a treat, I think it becomes much easier to kind of regulate that, rather than if you keep it from yourself and then you kind of allow yourself to have it. So I would say enjoy whatever time you might be able to get with family and eat the things that you like.
Thank you. It sounds wonderful.
I'm going to be doing it. All right. Well, thank you, everyone.
I hope that everyone who's listened today is going to make scones later on and your house smells wonderful.
Yes. Thanks for having me. Bye. Thanks.